But yeah, I think they could probably turn the aircon to around maybe 20 degrees and everyone would be pretty comfortable with that. But for some reason, yeah, they crank it right up and it's super hot. Super cold, should I say. Anyway, we're live, folks. So bringing it to you, it's Brainfood Live on Air, episode 116. We're bringing it to you every Friday, folks. So if you're interested in this type of conversational content, you should have a thrilling hour or plus to come, because I've got a very exciting show today. We have a slight change. You might notice, of course, it's like super early here in the UK and in Europe. We're doing an earlier session in order to speak to recruiting experts all the way on the other side of the world from China, because today's topic is going to be part of our global tour where we go to different parts of the world, virtually visit experts in different territories and find out a little bit more about what the recruiting challenges are there. So we're going to have a really interesting session talking about what the challenges of recruiting in China are in 2021. As ever, we have a co-pilot that is part of the global tour. It is Sergey Mack of Daxtra. How are you doing, Sergey? Good to see you, sir.
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Home.
No worries. You as a sponsor of the show need to do a bit of work. You understand this. So this is why you've been roped in.
I know sponsorship never comes without work, additionally.
It comes with work, mate. But actually, whilst we have you and on that topic, do you want to say a quick 30 seconds on what Daxtra is, what it is as a business, and why should people care about it?
Sure, yes. Daxtra is a nearly 20-year-old software company. We originally started in Scotland, in Edinburgh, as a spin-out from the University of Edinburgh. And we piggybacked on, at the time, very extensive academic research on natural language processing and text understanding. And then what we did, we applied it to recruitment. And we developed a suite of automation products that are agnostic as far as which ATS platform our clients are using. And so it integrates with a huge range of about 400 different ATS packages in order to automate and streamline certain recruitment processes. In whom's words, Daxtra is on a mission to make our clients' data work better for them. There is the recruitment funnel leaks in all sorts of places usually, and it's possible to fix that through technology. So what we do, we automate resume parsing in multiple languages, including Chinese. We have very high accuracy in Chinese parsing. We then put this data automatically onto clients' databases without duplication. We keep this data clean and updated, and then we employ our fantastic data mining, candidate mining and matching tool, which is also based on AI and machine learning, which essentially can conceptually match jobs to candidates, candidates to jobs, candidates to other similar candidates, and rank them according to their relevancy. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. I'm based in Hong Kong. We are located in 8 offices across the world. In Asia Pacific is Japan, China, and Australia. And we supply our technology to recruitment businesses.
Thank you very much, Sergey. I totally forgot, actually, that Daxtra had the ability to parse Chinese. So that is actually a really interesting dimension for a lot of us in the recruiting world, because obviously we are used to the Latin alphabet, and a lot of the practices that recruiters get involved in typically involve things like Boolean searching, for instance, and hacking around with Latin-based scripts. So how does that exactly work in China? So it's totally fascinating to me to figure out this a little bit more. Before we dive in to bring our guests on, though, we always review the newsletter. So let's do that real quick. Sergey, did you read it last week? And if so,
I did indeed.
What was interesting? Cool.
I found this issue. Yeah, I found this issue quite interesting, actually. I mean, what jumped at me straight away, I want to highlight an article, How to Be Less Depressed as a Recruiter, by our friend Ivan Gulenko.
Yes.
That's an interesting one, because the guy used to be a developer programmer himself, and then he switched to be a technical recruiter. So he's been on both sides of the game, and he gives some interesting topics and tips there. The other one was...
on that note, let me interrupt. Before we say, Ivan wrote a really interesting post on this, and he asked the question, is recruiting fundamentally a depressing job?
Indeed, yeah.
And I want you to have a think about that. And let me know in comments, whether you're on Crowdcast or on Facebook or on LinkedIn, what you think about the premise of that piece. Is recruiting fundamentally a depressing job? And his argument was it was, because there was so much of our emotional feeling is contingent upon the activities of other people. So unlike many other jobs, our day, how good or bad our day is dependent on people we can't control, the candidate, the hiring manager, the whatever it is. So is it fundamentally depressing? It'd be interesting to
I think fundamentally the bottom line he's trying to draw our attention to is that it doesn't have to be a depressing job. It tends to be with many recruiters, but
He did say that basically there are techniques to readdress this, and the fact that he had been a recruiter for several years and continued to be that recruiter is obviously evidence that he has got over it. But I think the premise is still very, very interesting. Like, are we basically more on an emotional roller coaster as a result of the nature of the job? And I thought that was definitely true. Like, there's huge highs, right, when you go make a placement, land a deal or something like that. But then there's huge lows when candidate doesn't show up on first day or you're doing stuff like this. Like, you can't control that. So yeah, super interesting. Leandro, no, it's not my mindset, but I think it is a condition of the industry is what I think, or the condition of the role. But like I say, interested in your opinions on this. Sorry, Sergey, go ahead. Give me another one that was good from last week.
I found it fascinating to read about the research from the Zurich Public Research University. What is it called? ETH or something like that. What they did is something interesting. They essentially analyzed very large volumes of data coming from major job portals to look at the bias that recruiters are employing in selecting candidates. So obviously, it's something interesting. I won't go through it, but what's interesting is people tend to get more biased towards the end of the day when they're more tired and when essentially the emotions just give in and bias takes over. So that's an interesting thing to take on board, because we don't actually think about these things when we're looking at candidates or selecting for a job. I thought that was a fresh view.
It's a fresh view, and it's actually really compelling when you compare it to your own experience, isn't it? So I've just shared it in the chat screen there, folks. Well worth having a look at this. Here's the premise of it is they tracked how recruiters made decisions on yes-knowing candidates on job boards. And they compared basically candidate names. So if you had a name that wasn't typically Swiss, this is Swiss-based research. If your name, for instance, was an Islamic name, or it was a name that was not, German, French, or Italian, or Swiss German, what would happen in terms of your likelihood of being selected as yes? And if they found that your likelihood would go down the later in the day that the recruiter was doing the job. So the theory was that recruiters get more bias when they get tired, because you're more reliant on your bias. You stop thinking. You want to get the day over. You're relying on heuristics. So I thought that was super fascinating. And it tells us something. I had an argument with a friend of mine on this. Is like, maybe if you're like doing candidate assessments or CV reviews, you should do them in the morning, because you're more prone to bias as your end of the day. End of the day should be admin, because your brain is switching off. You can't help that. So if you're loading in interviews and like screening calls and video calls towards the afternoon, that's really not going to be great for the candidate, because you're prone to bias. I'd love to know what your thoughts about that. Okay, cool. One more, Sergey, before we get our guests on.
Well, something that I'm still analyzing, reading, it's a bit convoluted, but I still found it very interesting. Decentralized organizing and organizational handbooks. So that's something that I intend to read further. I haven't finished reading that in full, but there are some interesting tips for our own organization that I want to, pick from there.
I've shared the chat link on the chat stream there. Definitely worth checking out. It's a massive handbook of decentralized organizations that have contributed their own how-tos in a single page. So if you're thinking about, oh, we're a distributed company now and we want to, rethink how we do that, there's a bunch of companies that have told you how they've done it. So it's a super useful resource in the chat stream. Okay, let's talk about the topic, Sergey. The topic is recruiting in China. Part of our tour, you and I, when we first had the idea of doing a global tour, is that we wanted to explore territories that few people knew anything about, including ourselves, because the world is overly dominated in recruiting. Everything is coming out from US, UK is generally the dominant sort of factory for ideas in recruiting. And I think that's great for those territories, but sometimes we found it rubs up against local conditions that doesn't make sense. So what this tour is about is to try and figure out directly from people who work in those territories, like, how do these ideas work? Is remote working a thing in China, for instance? How does DE&I apply in this territory? What are the priorities in this place? So this is the purpose of this exercise. So Sergey, let's go to you. You're kind of adjacent, not really. You're in Hong Kong. I mean, give us that perspective. How different is recruiting in Hong Kong compared to the mainland? Is it totally different? What things are similar?
Sure. Well, yes, I've been in Hong Kong for nearly 9 years now. And yes, it's been a huge learning curve, which is still ongoing. Now, China is a very fascinating place in that it changes so rapidly. So in my 9 years here, things changed considerably, like from the processes point of view, from the point of view of how you approach your clients or prospects, and all the way to availability of skills on the market, for example, which is obviously a huge market. Now, I kind of sit on both sides of the fence. We hire in China, we hire in Hong Kong, we hire in mainland China, although the team is still small, but it still challenges, certain challenges. And then at the same time, we supply technology to our recruitment clients in China as well. So I hear their stories as well. Challenges, I guess initially what I was hit with was the fact that the typical tenure in permanent employment of a typical employee in China is significantly shorter than what we used to seeing, or I used to be seeing in Europe, for example. So when I came
shorter,
to Hong Kong, the average permanent tenure in one job was less than 12 months. That was calculated on an average base. I think that's changed now. I think that, well, at least in Hong Kong, at least in my team, we have most of our guys have been here for more than 2 years, and some for much longer than that. But it's still kind of, I'm always nervous when I hire someone, because you think that, okay, you've been hunting this person, it costed you a lot in your time and money, and then you hire them, and then you train them for several months, and what if they leave after that? So that would be a wasted money. But they just taught me how to kind of look at certain signs and read candidates better, I guess.
You know what, that surprised me. I'd be really interested to know why that is the case, and whether that's different in different cities and territories. Obviously, one of the things about China, by the way, again, it's very easy to talk about like countries as a monolith, but we can sometimes forget how big China is. It's like an enormous country. It's a billion, 1.4 billion people on the planet. Some of its cities are bigger than European countries in terms of population. So they're going to have very, very different conditions, I would say. And even though they have obviously national regulation, national rules, they're going to have local conditions even within these different places. So let's figure out what all this means. We're going to bring on our guests here. So we've got a bunch of really interesting people to speak with. I'm excited to see this. So let's bring on Beecher. We're going to bring on Anne-Marie as well. I've got Janet here as well. She's a headhunter, I think from Shanghai. Let's see whether we can bring Janet on. And I believe James is here. So we're going to go with 4 people straight off the bat. Let's see whether we can do this. And Li Chuan, if he's there, I'm going to try and bring him on. Maybe we get Brian Su as well coming on a bit later, but we'll see. Oh, there's Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Hey, morning, afternoon, everybody. I'm great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Great. We can hear you fine, Anne-Marie. For the people who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are and what it is you do, Anne-Marie?
Okay, sure. I'm Anne-Marie McCork, and I'm based in Shanghai. I'm the head of GSK recruiting for China. A small sort of background comment. I've been based out of China for 18 years, and I've been doing recruiting for a number of organizations, and originally from Coventry in the UK.
Fantastic. Yeah, great to see you, Anne-Marie. And we have Beecher there. And Beecher, your name, by the way, I hope you don't, your head's going to get massive here. But your name was mentioned to me by 3 different people saying, yeah, speak to Beecher. He knows everything about China. We already have Beecher on the show, so it's great. Beecher, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. And Sergey, great to see you again.
Good to see you too, Beecher.
Yeah. So my name is Beecher. I'm originally from Australia. I've been in China and mostly in Shanghai since 1997. So I've been here a long time. And as Sergey mentioned, one of the things that stays consistent is the pace of change. So during that time, every moment you think you've understood something, it'll change on you. So it's a fascinating place, and it's a real privilege and pleasure to have been here so long and seen so many changes.
That's fantastic. And, I think it's great that everyone's here to help share this knowledge and demystify China a little bit in terms of the, what goes on in terms of recruiting. Okay, we have James here as well. James, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are, what it is you do?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is James Morley-Kirk. I'm a UK business psychologist based in Shanghai. Background in military and in aviation. I set up the China Select in 2006 in Shanghai, and along the bumpy journey that we've had, I've had great pleasure in meeting several of our colleagues on the show today. So we're still there, live and kicking, and enjoying it as it continues. It's a roll.
Great to see you here, James. And I think everyone's from Shanghai. And Janet, quickly, can you introduce yourself, who you are, what it is you do?
Definitely. I'm Janet Lu.
Oh, we've lost Janet a little bit.
I'm originally from Asia Carbon Search. Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, the VPN's not doing very well there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Janet. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I founded Asia Carbon Search about 12 years ago. Been in China about 20 years now. Doing search for 17 in Shanghai, originally from Hong Kong with a background in management consulting and private equity investment.
Okay, fantastic. Looks like everyone's based in Shanghai. Clearly the place to be. Let's go there straight away. Is Shanghai the place where interesting things happen with regards to recruiting? Like why, for instance, is there a clustering going on where HQs tend to relocate there, or if you're an international business, you think Shanghai has to be there? Why is Shanghai, I guess, is the question. Open to everyone here.
Have you been?
I haven't.
I think it's the best, most fascinating city in China, to be honest. It's huge. It offers a lot of opportunities for businesses, including international businesses. But that's my opinion as an outsider. I've been there many times. It would be interesting to hear from people who actually work there.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my perspective, Shanghai is one of the key headquarter locations. Beijing is another one. Shanghai has the highest, or one of the biggest GDPs and the highest GDP per capita in the country. So it's known as a first-tier city. Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are known as first-tier cities. And with 23 to 25 million people, it's and highly educated population. It's an incredibly important place as an entry point to the rest of the country. So that's why I think a lot of multinationals have initially set up their headquarters here.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it would be unusual to see geographical distribution across any territory. So there's a clustering effect. You mentioned first tier cities. Is that actually a technical term, or is that a colloquial term, Peter?
Yeah, that's a technical term. It's used by the Chinese government to differentiate the different parts of this huge economy here, and it goes right down to fourth tier cities, which are considered the least developed. And so there will be different policies to encourage the development of these second, third, and fourth tier locations. So yeah, that's a technical term used by the Chinese government.
Okay, so this is interesting for a lot of outside people. So what does this mean? Is this like a hotel rating system type of thing, where we count the number of airports, we count the per capita tube stations or something? Like how do you become a first tier city? Because suddenly when you create sort of tiers, then presumably there's a competition for cities to want to get to a higher tier, right?
Certainly there is, and yes, it is. It's all about counting stuff. So how many airports, how many miles of subway tracks. But at the end of the day, it's probably GDP per capita, which is the ultimate definition.
Got it. Very, very interesting. Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Beecher. Shenzhen, Guangzhou went first tier not so long ago, were they?
I don't think Hangzhou's just there yet, but I believe Shenzhen.
No, I mean Guangzhou.
Guangzhou. Guangzhou was always a first tier city. So Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and then Shenzhen recently entered that technical definition as well. Yeah.
Right.
But I think to your point, there obviously are some differences between, say, GDP per capita in Shanghai versus GDP per capita in Guangzhou. So there are obviously some still differences between first tier cities.
Does this have any impact in terms of the hiring aspect of it? Like for instance, is there like an employer branding scenario where young talented people, I'm first tier only, sorry folks, I need to be in a first tier city. Is that actually a concept among job candidates in China?
Yeah, maybe Anne-Marie, I think you'd be good to talk to that point.
Yeah, I was just nodding away there. So it really has an impact with regards to hiring. So depending on the sort of geographic footprint, and let's take west of China as an example, it's incredibly difficult to acquire good talent, qualified talent in sort of like second tier, third tier, fourth tier cities. So if you're looking at geographic expansion plans and how you're going to hire the correct talents, yeah, it has a massive impact in terms of the types of skills that you need to hire depending on the location of the hire. So then that would deal with sort of second and third tier cities really essentially. So we do face challenges in the south. In the south, in Guangzhou, was just mentioned, for example, that can be incredibly difficult for us to hire in. If you're looking at sort of like, so I'm in the healthcare sector right now, and so if that's like vaccine expertise or respiratory expertise, plus soft skills, plus English skills, plus sales capability, like a number of factors, it's a small talent pool actually that we'd be looking through, and then you want the quality of hiring that has the culture fit. So we can't particularly drop our standards if we're going to hire in those sort of locations. We still need them to fit the organisation and deliver the sort of growth that we need. So we definitely experience challenges in other cities. But, ironically, as I say that, I mean, one of the top, from a top talent perspective, if you look at Beijing as well, that's also very difficult for us to hire because there's extra increased competition, and Shanghai would be the same. So when you've also got this clustering of sort of top organizations that are employing in the first tier cities, yeah, you have like not an inflated salary system, but you have competition for talent actually, really. We just talked a tiny bit about Hangzhou, and then you've got Suzhou. So you've got places that are slightly outside of Shanghai, and within them they would have major employers as well. So again, we sort of struggle for talent between the two regions. So yeah, you have to be highly considerate of the location that you're hiring, types of talent that you need, and it has an impact.
Okay, so two things I want to just launch into straight away here. There is I'm ignorant, by the way, of most things, but certainly of what happens in China. So please forgive me if I'm giving you stuff that's super outdated or literally not actually correct. But isn't there an internal migration system in China where there's almost like an internal passport? So does that exist? And if so, what's the implication there in terms of I'm recruiting in Shanghai, some person's amazing, but they happen to live in a different part of the country. Is there some sort of internal visa situation we need to deal with?
I wonder if
Peter,
Janet could answer this one. What about Janet? I'm thinking Janet might be the best person to talk about internal migration in China. Janet, do you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was gone somewhere. It's called Hukou. So basically, you're born to a certain place, and based on where your mom was born, and that is important in terms of your kids' education. Okay, in terms of actually working, is reasonably easy. It doesn't need application to hire someone outside of Shanghai to Shanghai, for example. But unless you move their Hukou from where they were to Shanghai, their family would never be able to come because their kid can't get into school. So, and that system, go back to what you guys talk about in terms of ever changing. That system is ever changing as well. There's some years that they make it very difficult. In recent years, actually increasingly easy to move, especially for foreign educated professionals. So like in Shanghai, for example, if you are a foreign educator, have a master's degree, and you work, I believe 2-3 years in Shanghai, you can actually move your Hukou here. But every year you just have to look at the government and see what changes.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to add on Janet's point. I mean, so the issue actually is not in attracting talent to a first-tier city because they're considered to be quite desirable. The issue is if you've got an employee who's currently in these first-tier cities, and as to Anne-Marie's point, you're expanding in a third or fourth-tier city, it's almost like going through an expatriation of that individual. You need to talk about their package. Usually, to Janet's point, they will leave their family behind in a first-tier city because they don't have access to the same standard of schooling in that location as they would back here. So if they're married with a child, or now children perhaps, you're essentially probably going to be forcing them to spend time apart. And if you don't manage that as carefully as you would an expatriation, I think that can lead to turnover. So it's a pretty difficult and sensitive issue.
That's really interesting. Go ahead, Janet.
Particularly, that's extremely relevant for foreigners, for expatriates, because you basically can count the number of international school in second-tier city. Even if you kind of not look at quality, right? And if you look at the quality of the school, no expatriate is willing to put a, let's say, high schooler into a non-first-tier city in China. That's why the family or they go. Yeah,
but even the healthcare system in second, third-tier cities is by degrees different as well for locals and for foreigners. So it's just right across the board. It's very difficult to send someone out of these first-tier cities once they're in there. It's in comparison though, it's much easier to bring somebody in from a second or third-tier city because that's upgrading. And they, as Janet mentioned, after a few years, if they meet the criteria, they can move their Hukou, which is considered pretty desirable.
So what is the criteria? Is it time served? Like I'm there 2 years and I can move it? Or is it employment, like status, is like a fixed employment status unbroken? Like how do you move the Hukou?
It's a multi-tiered thing. So maybe Janet, you can explain.
Yeah, well, that it is a multi-tier. As I was saying, there's just like a lot of immigration law, right?
Yeah.
There's a set of requirements. There's other set of requirements for people that are outside of China but not educated outside of Shanghai but not educated outside China. Then you look at the company sponsor, a little bit like the visa system. Sort of it's not actually that clear. It's the number of years as well as the sponsor from the employers.
Yeah, so I tell you, so just to summarize this out, we don't want to obviously get too much into the minutiae of the Hukou system, but for people outside, they may not be aware, actually there is an internal migration management system in China, and it operates very much like an external one in a smaller country. So in other words, you would need effectively an internal passport and sponsorship or whatever reasons to move to different cities. Maybe that's easy to do if you're a single person because you're no issue. But the downstream impact is that your kids, if you have them, may not get access to schooling or other public services. Therefore, there's a deep consideration. So what that means ultimately is that people who are most mobile are going to be either single people or unmarried sort of individuals, or people who are prepared to, be separate from their family for a long period of time potentially to do that. So that's a really interesting dimension. And just a final on this point, it also is a very clear hierarchy of places people want to go, because if you can go to a bit top tier city, not only do you get obviously the great lifestyle, all of the consumer benefits, let's say, but you might have like long-term impact on terms of your education for your kids, for instance, which can get them obviously some social mobility on the ladder. That's super, super interesting. Okay, let's move on to think about something else. One of the big things that's happening in, I would say certainly the Western world, UK particularly, is that this idea, by the way, this idea of like these superstar cities attracting all the talent is like a global phenomenon, right? And one thing that COVID-19 has done is potentially say, oh, we can now work from home. It's now remote working. Maybe we don't need to pull the talent to these cities. We can kind of leave the people there and they can work from remote. And some people are very optimistic about this. Is remote working a concept in China? And are companies thinking along these lines? Too hard to recruit in Shanghai. Let's just keep the person where he is in a different part of the world. He can still work with us, but they will be located remotely. Thoughts on this, anybody?
And then from a GSK perspective, we've been really implementing the flexible working scheme. It's part of our performance with choice sort of mandate. And I mean, yes, so we're seeing remote working has completely accelerated as a result of COVID sort of 19 and has stuck with us actually really. And so it doesn't matter which part of the globe you are in, most people are dialing in. From a choice perspective, if we did a survey in to ask employees actually what they preferred, and the final outcome was that 1 to 2 days working from home was like most preferable. And we've been lucky, we've been back at work really since I think about May last year actually, so office-based work has been sort of back online actually since May. So I think generally people are taking a day or 2 days away from work or from the office and doing flexible hours, and incredibly positive impact on the sort of workforce, I think, even for managing lifestyle, but also I think from a performance perspective, the reality that people can work effectively from home, get things done. I think, you really get to see, I guess, employee excellence really as you roll out more sort of flexible ways of working. So it's really embedded in our lifestyle now in GSK, a lot more live broadcasts of activity and optional meetings, Teams is running everything really. So yeah, movement away from face-to-face, but face-to-face is still available if you need it.
You know what, that's just two things I want to separate on this, which is the cultural shift, the cultural change of, always needing to be in the office to now a lot more of a view that the office is a great place to work, but, not necessarily the only place where work can be done. And this other aspect of, like remote first, like when there is no office or this person is never coming in. Two separate things. So let's deal with the first one, Anne-Marie, because I think this is more aligned to the experience of GSK. So firstly, China's been back to the office more or less, right? The pandemic management is different in different places. And that has an impact in terms of the lockdown scenario. We're not bouncing backwards and forwards like we are in the UK, for instance. China has been back in the office for a long time. Therefore, maybe there's a less of a movement to permanently no office ideas. Is that true to say?
I think so. I think we still have that sort of like hybrid, which is sometime in the office, sometime at home, sometime face to face. So I think, perhaps at a philosophical level, because the rest of the globe has already been out for the year. So I think if we were to go out for the year, and it wouldn't be such a shock for us actually in terms of our management systems, the way we manage our teams, the way our online systems, the digital maturity of how we work, we could go to that model. However, at the moment, the choice is sort of a couple of days. There isn't any real active management of this actually. It really is driven down to an employee line manager choice scenario. With regards to your second question, which is could somebody work remotely? Yes, somebody could work remotely. We have that option available completely. If that was necessary, it's rolled out, and that decision is really taken at an organizational level. management sort of employee when on the higher or at the position sort of level, really. But generally we're seeing, because we have office locations that are working and functional, people are actually in the office, and people are working in the office 3 to 4 days a week, actually, really is what we're trending to see from a trend perspective. There would be, I'm sure there's other people would comment, but there would be a number of factors that would mean office worker is more enjoyable for people, actually, really, use the facilities, enjoy the work style, get things done, do face-to-face communications with who they need to. So there's different aspects to it, I think.
It's really fascinating, because if you study sort of the conversations happening in the UK, there's almost like a resistance to the concept of return to the office. It's almost at activist level now, where you've got the government saying get back to the office. This is the thing, and then you get everyone saying, "Nah, we're not doing it." So it's almost like a down tools type of vibe here in the UK. But maybe that's not the case in China. Perhaps it's more a case where the office has come back earlier. The impact of the pandemic was different. Therefore, there's been an injection of flexibility, but there hasn't been a wholesale shift. How does that impact the second idea, though? The idea, look, it's a massive competitive crisis, hiring for top talent in these cities. Why don't we just have this job permanently remote? Is that something companies are using strategically to acquire talent? Thoughts on this? Go to you, Beecher, if you know anything about this.
We were talking about Hukou before, and that also has some restrictions because that dictates how the company pays into your social security, and that's very, very localized and very, very fragmented. So my observation of what's happening, say like in the US, where you could be, your employer's in New York, but you could actually work remote from maybe anywhere in the country, it's more difficult from a social security point of view and from a labor contracting point of view to sit somebody outside Shanghai and then actually then pay into their local city social security account. So you may, to Anne-Marie's point, you may have people who are based in Shanghai working remotely, but it's much less administratively convenient to have people working across provincial borders. So that would be my observation. Although if for example that Shanghai person wanted to work remotely and then just travel to a lovely tropical place like Yunnan, that obviously would be fine. But they wouldn't necessarily make it easier or administratively enable to employ someone in Yunnan directly.
Okay, so the provinces need to be introduced here then. So China has loads of provinces, and social security is tied at a provincial level. So is that right, or did I get you right there?
Even more local, even at a city district level.
Okay, so that basically an employer contributes social security to your employees, and it pays into the municipality, let's say, and therefore, if this person decides he or she is remotely working somewhere else, that organization may then have to figure out how to pay to a different place.
Well,
I guess.
Well, if the labor contract's in the city where the entity is registered, then that's not a problem. They could then just travel around doing whatever they like, assuming the employer agreed. But the issue would be if, say, for example, GSK wanted to employ through the Shanghai with a local labor contract, that person was not based in Shanghai, they sat in Yunnan, then that becomes difficult. It's possible, but it's difficult.
You know what? It's crying out for a startup opportunity here, isn't it? I mean, we're starting to see them emerge because this is again an international problem, and a sort of any country that has a federal system or anything like that typically has these challenges as well. And you're starting to see businesses to say, you know what, we're going to help you do that. There's a pop-up way we can create an entity which allows you to be paid in this way, and so on. And it's fascinating how the legal systems have been built around the idea of sedentary workers that are residential to a place, and we're now wrestling with a future whereby place has changed in terms of its value. Like potentially you can deliver the value in completely different areas. So very, very interesting as well.
So I mean, but I mean that sounds like conservative and maybe a little bit out of sync. But things like to enable remote working, Alibaba and Tencent's the owner of WeChat. They've released specific remote or distributed working products. Alibaba's product is Ding Ding Talk, and Tencent's product's called WeChat Work. And that will allow you to chat internally, share files, manage your leave requests, expense reimbursements, and that all can be done via your mobile device. So that private infrastructure, that digital infrastructure to support remote working is very mature and sophisticated, but the regulatory environment's a little bit out of sync with what the big tech companies have been able to deliver.
Yeah, always the case. The regulation is always 10, 20 years behind, right? So I think this is probably going to be one of the coming concerns for this distributed way of working everyone's talking about. It's going to be the regs that's going to be the biggest friction point. Did you see that advert? There was a very interesting advert in the US where there was a provincial or state level divergence in terms of salaries. In other words, Colorado, I think employees were entitled to demand transparency on salary. If you're living in Colorado, you can say, anybody see a job advert, you can say, you know what, how much you're paying, they have to tell you. And companies hiring remotely throughout the US are saying, anybody can apply apart from Colorado people.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
Because we're not going to tell you the salary. Crazy, but true. But again, we have to wrestle with all of these. Let's talk about the tech, because you mentioned tech, BJ, here straight away. I know you work in the tech side as well. You talk about these like big private social networking apps delivering work-related services, it seems, in lieu of, let's say, a big enterprise specific business. So in sort of outside of China, I guess there may be more of a B2C, B2B difference in terms of technology provision. You've got corporate systems, for instance, that are corporate systems. People don't use them, on their own. And you've got private stuff that people use privately. But in China, it seems that these big super apps are trying to attack both of those markets. Is that fair characterization?
Yes. So SaaS as an industry in China is very, very immature compared to what you would see in Western markets. But the digital commerce infrastructure is probably the most mature and sophisticated in the world. And so Ali grew up in, and Tencent, the owner of WeChat, grew up in the B2C market, and were extremely successful in doing so. And then as a result of that success and that experience and the infrastructure they've developed, they've been able to move now very quickly into all sorts of B2B related functions and services as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And actually, we see things like Facebook Work back in the day when Facebook was like full of confidence, momentum. They were also trying to get in that way, weren't they? B2C first, and then thinking, you know what, everyone's using this app anyway. Why don't we try and use it as a work tool and roll it out that way? But I don't think there's a Western equivalent that's managed to do it. We're still pretty much separate universes when it comes down to, we want to play with these apps or we want to work with these apps.
Are you familiar with how people use WeChat?
I've never used it, but so I'd be happy to be educated on it, Beecher. I mean, I take it it's a daily use thing, right? People will flick it on and just enter the universe and use it for everything. All
right, shall I give you my 60-second intro to WeChat?
Pitch it, man.
Yeah. Okay. It's better than anything you've seen. It's absolutely awesome. So essentially, if you can imagine, it started off as a social tool, but then they had two kind of key moments. The first moment was they created something called the company account. And the company account enables a corporation, a business, to have a direct relationship with their followers. They were very smart. They didn't allow these company accounts to spam. So they said, you can have 4 push notifications to your followers, and they will go into the kind of like the chat stream of the individuals who follow you. And so, of course, sales and marketing functions and corporate communication functions love that, because then they could directly engage with their consumers ultimately, or their customers. And so up to 4 times a month, companies like GSK are pushing almost like an interactive digital magazines. So you've got articles, you've got comments, you've got videos, and so this comes then into the third sort of killer function, which is the digital wallet. So if you're, say, for example, Starbucks, with the WeChat digital wallet, you can accept payments for your, in this case, beverages. Through the infrastructure and logistics systems behind it, you can actually push out a notification about the latest spring or summer Frappuccino. The millions of people who follow it can click on that, purchase it, and have that Frappuccino delivered to their wherever they are within 30 minutes. But with the digital wallet, there's much, much more. Of course, you can pay your taxes, you can pay your utilities. I can pay James or split the bill at lunchtime. Any sort of offline shop will accept WeChat or Alipay instead of cash now. So you can buy anything offline using your WeChat or Alipay wallet. And so having that combination of push messaging, digital interactive content, plus the digital wallet enables you to have a really sophisticated CRM or social CRM function behind that. And why that's great for all the reasons that's great for sales and marketing, they've also been then applied to employer branding and talent acquisition. And so that's what I think, Anne-Marie, correct if I'm wrong, about 60% of multinationals now have a dedicated WeChat recruiting account. Is that about right?
I think it would be more than that, actually. I think it would be almost like it's got to be at least 99% coverage. I can't imagine anybody sort of being online, having a presence here without having sort of a WeChat page that's linked to their sort of like A, their industry, or B, their recruiting in some capacity. And then to add on to, I guess, what Beecher's saying, I mean, there's a number of functions that you can do with it. So there's your advertising and branding, sort of an interaction, engagement of your community, depending on the size of your community. But then I think, you know, a couple of things that are happening in organizations, and we've done before with Beecher, is, you know, you can actually like encourage referrals and, you know, manage, you know, increase referrals, pay minor payments, which are taxed appropriately to individuals. So you can boost your candidate pipeline if you create a campaign through this platform. So there's really innovative ways, actually. And then, of course, it spreads out from, you know, you share through friends and multiple shares. And if you also like create gamifications or some sort of like H5 clip with a video inside it, and you put a competition and then you share it with a deadline, you can get a really large funnel of candidates come through and a large amount of views. And you know, it's just really, and it's really fun to look at. It's fun to do. It's really quick and speedy.
Can you give us some idea of numbers, Anne-Marie? When you say really large, give us some figures on this.
I mean, I did a campaign, it's not in this company, but I did a campaign before, and we put together like a H5 clip, and it was like to dye your hair, and like we had like some sort of uploading methodology where you could pick the picture on, and people voted for the picture, and the winner had, I think we gave them a Dyson hairdryer actually at the end. But in terms of the number of views in the period of time, it was something like 250,000 sort of followers and 250,000 views actually, and then from then it links into applicants and then hires actually, so you get an increase from a funnel perspective. So it impacts like the awareness. You know, I have a different funnel: awareness, sort of like commitment, and engagement and commitment actually, really. So it can be really exciting. So, and then it has, yeah, that would be an example of that I would share. Big numbers.
Amazing. So very evidently, WeChat is a must-have channel if you're hiring in China. It would be a weird thing if you didn't have that, actually. And presumably, it's like you're putting a lot of your resources that way. It's like if you're talking about, you know, having dedicated, you probably need a dedicated recruiters managing it, don't you? If they're interacting with people or, you know, producing content for it or whatnot. So yeah, fascinating. Again, a tool that people outside of China would have heard of, but obviously have not been using. And there probably isn't anything like mine. It probably resembles like a LinkedIn that is on mobile as a company page that's connected with consumer behavior. And so if you're particularly a consumer-facing brand, it's a super powerful way to do recruitment and employment, employer branding, and so on.
If I remember,
go ahead, Tim. Sorry, James.
You Jinga did quite a repositioning, or at least a focus of effort onto WeChat marketing, WeChat recruitment marketing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. So because it's a form of, it's a medium of communication, but it's also an operational, or it also includes this digital functionality. For the best results, you need to include both that employer branding content, those campaigns that James and Anne-Marie were mentioning, plus the call to action. And the call to action could be join the talent pool, could be to submit my application, or 3, it could be to make a referral, either as an employee referral or as a non-employee for crowdsourcing related referral with rewards. So,
and just to intercede there, because it's attached to the wallet, you can actually reward people for the referral straight away. Like there isn't a requirement for another app to do that. So you can imagine the power of it. I mean, the incentive for just a random person to recommend somebody suddenly shoots through the roof, because very quick action, you can get the return.
Yeah, and you can get some. It's almost like you can become a part-time recruiter. Like somebody who has a good social network could become a part-time recruiter by just leveraging their social network to forward these positions with non-employee rewards, and then they get their payouts.
I need to download WeChat.
I'm very excited there.
You certainly do.
Because, someone with a big network, like an artificially big network, like maybe I've got these days, potentially, like the biggest problem I've got is identifying the vacancies, because I don't want to be like collecting vacancies. That's a problem for me. But if I can just like follow all of these brands that's saying, oh, I need a recruiter or whatever, then I can say, yeah, speak to this person. Boom, there's a referral. And then suddenly that becomes, like you say, I could be permanently be a floating recruiter, so to speak, for all of these companies, connecting all brands with all people. So very, very interesting. Very, very interesting.
I just want to talk to the idea of like having a full-time person, because I think there is this sort of idea that it takes up too much time, but it doesn't take up that much time. I think if you get organized behind sort of the platform itself, in terms of, Beecher mentioned 4 articles a month, for example. You put together an events calendar, you put your employer brand, your recruitment marketing calendar together. There is some operational management internally, and you need some good quality staff who understand how to do employer branding and recruitment marketing. But once you've got that engineered, I guess one of the benefits of this is that you can reuse any of that material and in multiple platforms. So the way that we're using it now is like, if we create a video that has some sort of like manager, we're doing a lot of more video my jobs, which is an individual sort of advertising the jobs and doing a tour of the office. You can reuse it on multiple platforms actually. So it's not just a one use. Whatever content you're producing, of course, and it's probably the same as any sort of marketing activity that you're doing, you can use on multiple platforms. You can just segment it a little bit more. So we have to be doing that actually. I think so. I guess what I'm saying, we need to talk to employer branding as a function really within recruitment. The part of that has to be done, it can't be ignored. So the digital marketing aspect has to be done by any recruiters, and then you just use it. The most mature recruiters would use it in any market, in any platform really. So we have 6 platforms, 3 prioritized, and different uses in terms of the material that we present on those.
Yeah, very, very interesting. It's a fascinating thing that to explore. Leaving WeChat behind for a moment, what other places should a business be on, or think about advertising jobs in China? Like, for instance, I did a global survey, and China is conspicuously missing on this, simply because the audience that I've got, because I'm writing in English, and it's basically, China's always been quite a low number of subscribers to the newsletter, therefore a low number of people that end up doing the survey. But everyone says Indeed, everyone says Monster, the classic stuff outside in the Anglo world, so to speak. But those things are not going to be viable or useful in China. So what other places do we go outside of WeChat?
So we're using 51.jobs. We have a number of job boards. There are some really sophisticated job boards actually, and also they have also branched out into recruitment marketing, and they're great actually. So you can get that same sort of experience from the job boards that are available here. LinkedIn is still a really, really strong sort of database and engagement tool for MNCs, I think, for any organization, depending on the talent pool. I would say, and then Bilibili is actually quite interesting, I think, for the younger population. So for us, we do quite well with Bilibili, for sort of intern hiring for some sort of our younger demographic. We do pretty well on Bilibili actually. So they would be a few that I'd just call out and let somebody else know.
Any other thoughts on this, guys?
Somebody on the job feed mentioned Boss Jupin. And that's hit the headlines recently for for being under review by the Cybersecurity Bureau. But that's a pretty good channel for certain types of positions. So blue collar hiring, it's quite good for, and for retail, hospitality type roles, it can also be quite good for. The difference, I suppose, I'd call it probably a job board 2.0 in the sense that it's often used directly by the hiring manager, and he or she will have to accept a resume, and then they can engage through the app in a direct conversation with the candidate. Now, in a large enterprise organization, you probably don't want to have the recruiter spending a lot of time with each individual candidate having a chat. But for smaller enterprises, and again for blue collar type roles and retail and hospitality roles, it can be pretty useful kind of channel to add on to the other channels available.
Yep, very interesting. Boss Zpin, I think it's called. So we're going to try and pull these links together. Oh, by the way, if anybody is available and can stick the links in the chat stream, please do so. That would be super useful. Okay, let's talk about other ways. So we talk about attracting, and all. Is there such a thing as sourcing in China? So in other words, this idea of attracting candidates is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to actively source something and target people. Does that actually happen? And if so, how does that work exactly? I always wondered, how do you source in Chinese, for instance? Like what kind of things you type into a search engine to produce candidates? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Janet, you could help us with this. Is candidate acquisition, is it all mainly about attraction? In other words, getting them to come to you, or is there also a component of sourcing where you go out and find them?
Right. I guess it depends on the level of the positions, right? On the lower position, you can't afford to hunt. There's too many people. But in the traditional executive search, with the senior, mid to senior level, you have to go out to hunt.
Okay. So I think we got that. In other words, senior exec, obviously you have to do headhunting. So that's almost like a classic way to do it. These people aren't going to be on the market anyway, right? So you're going to have to target them in some fashion. But at the lower level, you're saying the candidate market is too big, and there's no incentive for recruiters to go and individually target. Is that right?
I guess instead of saying there's no incentive, the economy of scale is not there. So a lot of the headhunters are very focused on a particular function. So they have candidates on, let's say, marketing that come to them all the time, right?
Okay.
So they be busy screening these people, less alone actually hunting.
No. Okay, I think we've got it. We got a little bit of audio backlash there, Janet. So we didn't hear everything. But let's move on to this other aspect of having acquired the candidate and talking about assessment. Like, how do we assess people in as candidates? Obviously, COVID's had a huge impact worldwide in terms of the use of video interviews. We're now thinking, okay, let's abandon in-person interviews, for instance. I think telephone interviews have definitely kind of receded in the UK as well. So how does it work with regards to China? Is there a particular way in which candidates expect to be assessed?
James, I think that's you.
I still defer to you guys. Anne-Marie, how's your background? How do you manage it?
So I was waiting for you to answer.
Back at us.
Yeah. So then, from an assessment, there's absolutely, of course, the potential to have assessment within your recruiting portfolio in terms of how you hire candidates. So if I look at our sort of graduate hiring, we have a very sophisticated graduate hiring process. That tends to be where organisations have invested time with regards to really thoughtfully applying sort of digital assessment, assessing like the candidate profile, and then also sort of so we have assessment embedded into sort of graduate hiring or future leader program hiring most normally, I mean, well, I have seen it extended a little bit outside of that. If I look at it really as a TA professional, the amount of organisations that have properly extended it into other portfolios of hiring, like experienced hiring, it's a little bit less, actually. I think there's more potential to do that. So my honest answer is plenty of potential to increase the quality of assessment in experienced hires. It doesn't matter which organisation that you're in. And I would say that James has a good answer to that, because like in terms of the range of assessments that are available and the type of quality, you know, how you would assess quality, he's got all of that portfolio sort of set down really. If it's a So James, I'll ask you to talk to that. So we did it in, we did use it in executive hiring recently. So within the executive hiring space, we've used like a particular assessment to check, to just do like a psychometric review of the candidate, do the culture fit, check it alongside the interview process, and give feedback to the hiring manager. And that would be at a GM level, really, essentially, like to add that extra layer of information about the candidate that can help us to make the final recruitment decision. And again, within that, you would have the human sort of consideration. So you have the interview process, you have the assessment data, you have proper psychometric testing that fits that. I'm sorry, I'm so long. I do like this topic. And that fits that job, actually. I'm very, not just because of the sake of it, actually, really. And James helps design those types of sort of frameworks. So
assessment is a huge topic in of itself, Anne-Marie. So thank you so much for giving us a breakdown of this. I'm hearing from this. So from a candidate point of view, what I want to sort of explore is, do candidates expect a phone call? Has that disappeared? Do they expect text? Is that okay? Do they expect it through WeChat? Like, what is the channel that you interact with candidates? In just to give you an example, obviously in the UK, where I've got some experience, the action of calling a candidate is now turning into less and less acceptable, because candidates want it by email. They don't want to be like put into a position where they're interacting necessarily without controlling when that interaction happens. What is the best way to approach a candidate in China?
Any way you can get hold of them. Sorry. So yeah, text is okay, WeChat is okay, phone call is okay, through their friend is okay. It's not so different, I don't think, actually. I think email is probably not going to get through. I might suggest that email might not get read, perhaps.
That's interesting to know. Yeah. So
unless it's white collar role, yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, but maybe as people have gone completely into the mobile world, so to speak, email will definitely recede, because it's definitely a desktop technology. So yeah, very, very interesting.
Sorry,
okay.
Can I just jump back for a moment to the assessment topic? Because I think I'd love to hear from James for a moment. The China labor law is very much cited to the employee, which for obvious historical reasons. So it's not termination at will at all. In fact, terminations are incredibly difficult. And so James and I were having a conversation around dark side personality kind of testing to look at your potential risk. So I just wanted to, I think it's more appropriate or applicable, here than perhaps other markets due to the employee friendly labor law. So James, maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Actually, you picked up quite a few things there, Beatrice, so I can pick them all up today. I think that there are a few standout things in assessment in China, at least from my perspective. And you have to remember that GSK, is a full-time recruitment business. They've got to pull stuff in to fill their pipelines. They're doing on live assessments, managing pipelines. We don't do this. China's like, we look at the assessments themselves. Beta and Ajinga, they're doing the whole recruitment marketing through assessment and management, pushing candidates out as well. So our perspective is slightly different. Things that stand out from the assessment part is that, one, assessment is really standard. People expect to be tested in China. They always have been. And they have no choice, absolutely no choice. They will be tested. And the experience of testing, especially for graduate hiring, which is what obviously most of the tier 1 cities and online assessment is doing, they're used to being tested. They expect it. So they will be tested. They know they're going to do that. If they're applying for a big company, they know they're going to be pushed through mental ability, personality stuff, or culture fit things. It's just going to happen. So within that, it's a very, very familiar testing is very familiar to the folks. Within that, then of course, and a graduate population, you've got plenty of cheating and managed cheating and managed training of how to beat systems to get through to get to an interview. So that's endemic. It just is. The protections for individuals in terms of privacy, in terms of data access and so on, is nothing. Bias in systems, they've got nothing they can do about it. When we're talking about AI and AI applications, which is massive now in China, processing people with chatbots all the way through the screening process into competency-based personality reports, blah blah blah, into AI, different levels of AI interviewing before they get to a human being. Again, I know GSK is more personal than that, but that's very much where the big platform investments are going. These candidates have no choice but to go through it. And there's no way they can say this is a biased process. There's no way they can do a higher view and take them to court and say, we don't like what you're doing. Nothing. So within there, you've got then a system that's set up for abuse by assessment companies and by employers. And this is really important from the assessment point of view, where we're looking for fair and equal opportunity to show your potential.
Well, it's actually a really interesting sort of thing to talk about, which is what the attitude is to issues like AI, for instance. And the high view example, I think, is very relevant because that's more or less kind of stopped the innovation of facial recognition in use of hiring in the US, and presumably this will be the case in Europe as well. But we may well see huge divergence with regards to the development of that technology in places like China, for instance.
It's not stopped it in China. It's not stopped it.
It's the conversation is different, right? Like I talked to last week was a conversation. No, week before was a conversation about the ethics of using AI and technology, and we were stuck in a conversation where basically there were so many like risk mitigation factors that everyone had to think about before implementing any technology. We kind of got to the point where we thought, you know what, it's going to be easier just to speak to this person and do you know what I mean? Rather than put these risk mitigation factors in. So I do think that's maybe a potential direction that the US and Europe might take, but it may be very different in China and potentially in different parts of the world that doesn't adhere necessarily to those values. So very, very interesting here as well. I've just noticed the time, by the way, folks, and we're kind of moving, eating too much of your time, so I know it's the afternoon for you. So I want to go and talk about some other concepts, which I think are in universal ideas, and I put quote unquote because the more virtual touring I do, the more it's obvious that ideas that are perceived to be universal actually don't necessarily land in local markets, or they mean different things. Like for instance, when we were talking about DE&I in the Middle East, what does that mean? Oh, it actually means recruiting more native population, right? Rather than different people. It actually recruits. The DE&I is focused on recruiting citizens. So let's talk about DE&I. Is it a conversation in China? And if so, what is that? And if not, why is that?
Anne-Marie.
Yeah, it's a big conversation actually in China. It's a constant conversation in China. I think partly within GSK in terms of obviously I'm employed by GSK, so I've had a history of sort of MNC sort of working life here really. So D&I always is very prevalent in terms of how we do things. So then, I mean, what it looks like in China, I think there is, what it looks like in APAC actually, it's even extending outside of China actually. So I mean, I think to us, we have a global strategy that we're trying to implement that has core principles around sort of respect for the individual and sort of inclusive workplace for people no matter sort of from what background really. So that is a principle that's applied across, our workplace wherever we are located. So from a diversity perspective, I think that tends to be called out, I'll keep it short actually, but it tends to be called out gender is a big topic in China. It's not really of concern because typically we have like good gender distribution within sort of the workplace. So gender would be a topic. I think age is actually high on the agenda here with regards to the conversation. Socioeconomic topics are also quite a big sort of topic in China. I think ethnicity as it pertains to sort of the Chinese market really with regards to migration, some of the topics that we've been talking about. So I think there's more, I mean, it's really, I think from a principle perspective, I think it's something called Harmony Through Integration from Confucian, right? But I was doing a little bit of prep really in terms of like the value system, and then really this is this real philosophy around respect and integration of people actually. So there's a slightly different angle in China, but with regards to like the rollout of how diversity appears and how it appears in recruiting, and you know the sort of main methodologies that we use, they're still as mature, I think, as other markets. You might see it, you might not see the types of things we might see with regards to sort of LGBT, for example, like a big loud sort of flare around sort of topics like that. But it is in the background, you know, from a recruiting to make sure that you have the best quality and the best representation in the selection pipeline, and the best person is hired is very articulate. I want to go back to something else that was sort of called out earlier, really. There's maturity in HR and recruitment in the marketplace within China. So the professionals that you're dealing with fully, you know, perhaps that I've came across, understand these topics actually, and understand assessment, understand D&I, understand what it means, and understand how to apply it within their organizations. You know, it's an incredibly mature market from that perspective.
Let's talk about something that has just occurred to me, but I want to throw it in there. A conversation that's been happening is the perception of TA and recruiters within a corporate context. And I think in the sort of the milieu of the Western world, so to speak, it's always been this sense of, oh, you know, a little bit of lack of self-confidence, in the sense that, you know, we're always trying to get to the top table, so to speak. We're not quite there. We're not there with sales, for instance, or we're not there with technology as in terms of departmental respect within a corporation. Where is the standing of TA in China? Is it a respected profession, or is it a function that companies think, yeah, it's critically important, or is it kind of also battling its way up the status hierarchy there, so to speak? Thoughts on this?
I think being on the ground, all I'd say is that, you know, talent as a topic is high on the agenda of everybody, actually, really. So recruitment and the value that it brings to an organization is always respected. I think one of the eccentricities of this market is that perhaps HR might be viewed slightly higher on. We're all recruiters on the call, I hope, really. I'm not sure how many HR professionals are on the call, but I think there is a minor pecking order, actually, that would suggest that perhaps, and I think it's reflected in market data, actually, so from a salary perspective. So this isn't just my own sort of viewpoint. I think, you know, perhaps organizations, some of the functions within the HR organization might be viewed as slightly higher, even if you look at comp and benefits of those individuals, really. So I think there's like a little bit of dichotomy that's going on, I would say, perhaps.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a late joiner here, so I want to thank Brian for spending sort of tacking Brainfood Live on the end of his day. I know he's been super busy, so thank you for joining us, Brian. Brian, for the people who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are, what it is you do?
Hello, yeah, thanks for letting me jump in. I'm Brian. I'm based in Singapore now. I used to be in Shanghai for 20 years, coming from talent acquisition management. I'm now doing career coaching in Singapore.
Yeah, fantastic. Everyone in Shanghai, we already had like a really interesting conversation about why everyone is in Shanghai. I obviously need to visit. Okay. Yeah, you know, that is the plan. I'd love to check out different parts of the country. Coming to Brian, to bring you into where we're at with this conversation, we're trying to think about like some of these quote unquote universal values and how do they apply to the Chinese market in particular. We've just talked very quickly about diversity. I want to talk now about a concept in the Western world we call alternative work. So in other words, this idea that, you know what, we need to focus less on getting full-time employees. We need to be sensitive to the fact that this person may want to work 3 hours a week or something, or this person wants to job share, or, you know, different types of worker. How do we integrate them into our workforce? Is that a thing in China, or is it like full-time employee or you're non-employee employed at all? Like, how does the rise of alternative work? Is that a thing in China? Brian, you want to give this a shot?
Yeah, there are two strokes to this. If we look into the labor law in China, it's not very flexible yet to accommodate this. It's very pro-employee, so companies, employees be very cautious how to dish out open-ended contracts. Okay, liable for a lot of risk there. But the other stroke to look at is there are emerging, appreciation for needs for mothers or training and working together. So at least more of the innovation companies will be open to that, and more aligned with foreign talent who understand both the employers and the culture, as you mentioned, the alternative way of working. So I think there's still some runway to achieve that. Probably happening more in the primary cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen.
You know what, Brian? You're the second person that's mentioned the employee-friendly labor law, which basically means there's no US-style at-will firing, which presumably is there a way in which companies can mitigate risk by having fixed-term contracts? Then is that how it typically works? To say, you know what, Brian, I like you. I think you're pretty good, but let's do 12 months before we offer like a full-time job, a permanent job. Is fixed-term contracts, are they a thing in China?
Yes, I mean the safe way that most employers will play this is a 2+1. They do maybe 2 years of a 1 year or 2 year contracts, and then before they jump into the third year, where they need to be very critical on whether they are willing to shift this to a full permanent staff. Right. Once you cross that line, it becomes very difficult and arduous for an employer to mitigate any labor disputes. Yeah.
Right.
But, yeah. 3 years less under is a bit more clearer there.
So as a recruiter, I'm already thinking that you can track people's tenure as a good chance to speak to when someone may be like hire ready or active on the market, because if they've been there for 2 years or so, there's a good chance they're not going to get renewed because the risk for the company is going to be too high, because you can never then let that person go. So maybe the timing of when a candidate will be receptive can also be based on the tenure of the candidate in terms of how long they've been working with that company.
I think it works both ways, that the candidate may be more open to explore before they commit to a longer term contract, right, where they will go into better benefits, perhaps. I still think it's more about conversation when they need to terminate a employee, where it's not that expensive, but it's just a few more months here and there on severance pay. Yeah, so I lean towards that there's still more flexibility for the employee to mutually observe whether they want to stay on and move on.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
So that's not a variable. Yeah, I don't think that's the key variable.
No, cool. Listen, folks, we're going to come to the end of the show, so I appreciate everyone's time. But before I let everyone go, I just wanted to basically ask around Robin here, like, what advice would you give to an employer that is hiring in China for the first time? Like, what are the one takeaway you can give to that person to say, you know what, you got to have this in your mind before you go and approach this. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time and money. It's going to be painful for you. So, okay, let's go with you first on that, Anne-Marie. Give your former self, before you arrived in China, if you could advise this person what they need to know in order to be a successful recruiter in China, what would you give them? One thing. Sorry, Anne-Marie, can you repeat?
Hire a good recruiter.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Is it a premium job? Hopefully it is in China, a premium job. Okay, let's go to you, Beecher. How about you? One bit of advice for a company that is hiring in China for the first time. What do they need to know?
I was talking to a client based in Australia on Monday, and they were hoping that they could use their applicant tracking system to receive their resumes from candidates in China. And we came up very quickly against China's firewall, which meant that candidates were having to wait 30 to 40 seconds to open a page to access their application tracking system to apply to the role. And so that was the obvious block for why they had no candidates. So being clear about how that firewall will affect your technology, I think is one thing. As Anne-Marie mentioned before, I think get used to local job boards and how they work, I think is the other thing. To the discussion we were just having now, he's dropped off. Brian dropped off about labor law. The labor law is critical to understand. You want to set up your probationary period and your contracting, your handbooks very well. due to that issue of difficult to sort of terminate an employment contract. I think finding local partners, but probably my final statement is that when I was, first in this industry like 15, 20 years ago, working for a foreign company was considered highly desirable. But that's no longer the case. The case today is that Chinese candidates are excited at the prospect of working with famous Chinese companies. And so foreign companies need to position themselves quite differently and have a very clear understanding of what their employer brand position is and what would make them attractive to potential candidates. Because they can't just assume being foreign is sufficient. And in fact, in many cases may count against them. So looking and feeling local, having those dynamic engagements through the technology of choice, as Anne-Marie was mentioning, through WeChat, I think that's really, really important. And I think that takes a little bit of understanding initially as a company comes into China to trying to hire local folks.
Yep, no worries. Great stuff, Beecher. Okay, go to you, James. Give us one tip you can give for a company trying to recruit in China.
Yeah, I echoing some of the stuff that Anne-Marie and Beecher just said. You've got technology, legal, marketing, assessment issues to consider. You really got to do your homework. Just don't assume that what you do in wherever you are applies. You've just got to ask questions and get some decent advice. Really, really important. I think the other thing that I think we haven't maybe picked up on, because we're based in tier 1 cities and we do most of the hiring, recruiting is done with people in tier 1 cities. So they, it's the modern China. There is a huge amount of China that is more traditional China. And this is where state-owned enterprises dominate the market. They dominate life. That part of China is still existing. Those sorts of approaches to work and life are slightly different than we get in tier 1 cities. So if you're looking beyond Shanghai, if you're not hiring and getting high-tech, high-value folks, you've got to think very differently again.
Yeah, so that's very, very clear as well. Thank you very much, James. Basically, the conversation we've had so far is almost exclusively about tier 1 cities, right? If you're recruiting in a different, and of course that's a percentage, but vast majority of recruiting presumably is going to be not in tier 1, and that's going to be a completely different ballgame. Okay, Brian, let's go to you with the final one before we lose you again on the internet gods. Give us a tip for a company looking to recruit in China for the first time.
Thank you. A employer may have wonderful conversations with candidates, whether it's for 3 or 5 rounds. My advice, try the best to do good reference checking. Reference check is not just on paper, but word of mouth. Get to know your background of the applicant, because you have only one shot, especially when the employer is not always in Shanghai or Beijing, right? Especially with the remote management. So reference check is very, very valuable and important. And I did that quite deeply when I was a headhunter.
Right, because essentially it's important to validate what you think, and potentially there may be a misinformation, if you like, about background or skills or competence and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not just about the hard stuff like the certificates on the titles, but the soft stuff on how they work, how they behave, the tendencies. And so it's not just about risk, but also learning development to know how to nudge and work with that local high-value employee in Shanghai or Beijing or elsewhere.
Yep, very, very good. Okay, fantastic. Listen, everybody, I've eaten way too much of your time, so thank you so much for your contributions. It's been like a fascinating session. Hasn't it been fascinating, folks? I mean, I've learned a huge amount. And not only fascinating, it's kind of made me think there's so much more to learn. And that's the beauty, I think, of having conversations of this type. It's to illustrate that there's always more to know. And I'm very pleased that we're going to be doing this global tour and visiting different places. I think it is very important to speak to individuals that have direct experience of working and living in these places, because we don't hear about it, and we need to know exactly where that's going. I think next sort of stop may well be India. We know nothing about that. A huge recruiting market. No one talks about Latin America. Again, that's a huge territory. Loads of things happening there. And of course, Africa, loads of recruiting happening, but outside of South Africa, who talks about it? We don't get access to that information. So we're going to go around the world and keep rolling this on. Okay, Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure seeing you. Beecher, thank you for your contribution. James, thank you for your sorting this out, more or less. And Brian, thanks for dropping in at last moment. Janet, thanks for you coming in early doors. Sorry we couldn't keep you there. And Sergey, of course, thank you for being co-pilot, sir. Great to have you, mate.
Thank you very much, Kong. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was great, huh?
Yeah, it was great.
I thought that was great.
I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I can second a number of thoughts and points fleshed out. I also learned a lot of new stuff for myself. Yeah, I want to reconnect with Beecher to pick his brains on a few things.
Yeah, there was some really great intelligence there, and you know what? Yeah. It was just a bit frustrating. We couldn't. I mean, Janet, thank you for joining. Couldn't get your insight as much as we liked, but yeah, so much more to know. I didn't know about the first tier. I knew a little bit about the Hukou, but now I get it. It's basically interim passport. But there's much more to explore, right? Much more to explore. Fascinating stuff. Okay, listen. Thank you very much, Sergey. I'll let you go. You have a good weekend, and we'll catch you. We'll catch you next time. I think you're back for another shot, so we need to talk about the next place we go visit. You let me know where you want to go.
Sounds good.
Take it easy, man.
Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay, that's it, folks. You have a good weekend. Oh, by the way, obviously, the England match is happening on Sunday, England versus Italy. It's going to be a fantastic game. I hope you're watching it. I've got England 2-0 for that.